Hi everyone. Are you excited? This is the end of the first day. I hope you had end of the second day, I guess. I hope you had a really good time so far. I'm Shawn. I'm also known as Swyx on the internet, and this is the third age of JavaScript. It's going to be a very quick, fast-paced talk. So just stay at the high level, and I have done my best to give you as many pointers along the way. But don't worry about taking notes. All this will be on my Twitter. Actually, I think it just went on my Twitter because it's scheduled tweets. All right, so the bottom line up front, what are we going to be presenting today? I'm going to be presenting for the first time ever this weird rainbow wall of logos. And it's basically the mental model that I've used to categorize the third age of JavaScript over the past 3 years that we've been in it. All right, why am I doing this? Because I believe that you basically build a career over playing long-term games with long-term people. And I think it's useful to, after a whole day of conferences talking about individual technologies, to zoom out a little bit and think about the long term. And that's what I got started about 3 years ago, thinking about what is changing over the course of the history of JavaScript. So this is kind of the original tweet that kind of went viral, basically categorizing the 3 ages of JavaScript. We'll go into that a little bit more. And even one of my readers who's played this game before, I don't actually know what game this is. This is like some Lord of the Rings game. He photoshopped the title of this talk, which I think is pretty exciting. OK, I'm also very inspired by tech radars. I think tech radars are very superficial, usually put out by analysts, but also it's a good idea for you to have a look at the field and kind of categorize like what one person thinks you should look at and one person think what's sort of on the rise. So I think those are really interesting. So what we're going to try to attempt to do for the first time ever is to do a tech radar for the third age of JavaScript. So we're going to do the original story. I've done talks about this before. You can look it up online, so I'm not going to belabor the point again. But we're going to start with increasingly speculative fields. So rejoicing in current trends, replacing them with incrementally adoptable tools, replatforming, reskilling, and then finally speculating on opportunities. All right, so let's talk about the original story. I just realized I don't have to look at the screen because I have a screen here. So TLDR of the third age of JavaScript thesis is that every 10 years there's a changing of the guard in JavaScript, right? The first age was very much establishing the language with ECMAScript 1, the specification, and ending with ES5-ish. That was about the first 10 years. And the second 10 years was very much building out the ecosystem with Node.js, Chrome, NPM, all being born in the same year, and then building out of the front-end frameworks. The third age is where we entered in 2020, where we're starting to consolidate a lot of these tools. I took all of these tools, the notable big ones, and color-coded all of them, and broke them out into individual missions, if you want. Don't worry about taking notes on all these, by the way. They're covered in previous talks of mine. So we got language development, we got build tool development, runtime development, framework development, of which React is by far the most successful one. So you're at the right conference, folks. What is the thesis of the third age? The third age is it's driven by two things. One is the death of the rise of ES modules and the death of CommonJS and the death of IE11. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And two is the change, the phase shift in JavaScript tooling, where we're being driven by systems core scripting shells. It's the idea where the core of our of JavaScript tooling or infrastructure is being written in systems languages like Rust and Go, and the shell of of these tools that we interface with day to day is still being written in scripting languages like JavaScript. Actually, I highly recommend this blog post by Lee Robinson, Rust is the Future of JavaScript Infrastructure, that lays out sort of the Vercel Next.js perspective on this, which is pretty much what the future is going to be like. So you might as well read up on it because you have a peek into that view. TLDR, first age, building our language. Second age, users expanding the language. Third age, collapsing all those things that we learned over the past 2 ages. The result, better developer experience, better user experience. I don't need to elaborate because I've talked a lot about this over the past 3 years. So we're going from a toy language in sort of designed in 11 days to a full application platform, which is why we all have jobs, which is fantastic. All right, I've recapped the third age thesis. What is new? First, we should rejoice in current trends. So the last time I gave an update on this, we had ES modules really picking up steam in 2020, and we just finished 2021. I'm pleased to share that it's continued to grow very, very quickly. At the pace of this growth, if it keeps up, will probably be about 50% of websites serving ES modules by about 2026, 2027, which is a huge change in a very, very short amount of time. So it's interesting, like what is driving all this, and we'll talk a little bit about why. Second shift, dev to IE11. Woo! We're now 1 month away from the official end of life of IE11. Actually, it's kind of like a thing you can't really flush away. It's going to stick around a little bit more because apparently you can pay Microsoft for extended end-of-life support for another 3 more years. But the most important thing I was looking for was the US government. So the US government tracks all website traffic to its properties, right? And obviously you have to support the maximum amount of users. And they have a rule, they have the 2% rule, which is as long as any browser has 2% market share to US government websites, they have to support it. In November 2020, it was 3.6%. November 2021, it was 1.6%, and now it's not even tracked. They have officially dropped IE support, alongside of Twitter, Skillshare, all these people, but most importantly, React, which was the last framework to drop it. So it's really coming along really well. And we're driving towards June 15th, which you can tell all your coworkers if you still support IE11. I think it's meaningful to drop free support for IE11. If you still want to support it, if your customers still need it, then charge for it, right? Make sure you're not spreading the costs around. What other trends can you really, really count on? Next.js is winning so hard. They have a giant booth over there, and if you look at everything from the GitHub stars to npm downloads to Next.js, like actual website usage tracking, it is by far the winningest winning of the framework, and all kudos to them. They've invested really hard to get here. So no surprise there. There's more interesting stuff in the state of JavaScript 2021, which I also helped to contribute on if you see the conclusion page that I did. But one thing that's interesting is I want to draw your attention over here. You can't really see it over here, which is kind of a shame. But essentially, like everything to the top right is things that people use a lot and people love, right? And you can see all the tools that are in the top right quadrant starting to turn a little bit. And that's a little bit of the changing of the guard in the state of JavaScript that may be interesting for people looking out for what's next. So we can go into a little bit about what's next. So that was the phase 1. That was the rejoicing in current trends, reaffirming things that we already knew was doing well. Stage 2 is looking into the new tools that all these creative, innovative, open source people are putting together. And I think it's really fascinating. So, oh my God, this did not turn out well. We ported it from Google Slides to PowerPoint, which is why it's turning out that way. But essentially, there's a whole turnover of the ecosystem based on the rise of ES modules natively and the system score scripting shell thesis. Webpack to Vite, Babel to SWC, Jest to Vitest, Prettier to dprint or maybe Realm, ESLint to RSLint, NVM to FNM, TypeScript to maybe JSDoc. We'll talk a little bit about that. That's a little bit controversial, as well as a bunch of these other amazing projects here, some of which are sponsors. Okay, I want to be clear. I'm not saying we should switch over everything today just because we like new things. I think we should explore what the trade-offs are. But in order to do that, we need to evaluate them and know about them. So what I'm doing here is sort of casting a light on, like, there's a lot of effort in the JavaScript community over the past 3 years trying to reinvent these things and trying to sweep away old assumptions. And I think it's worth exploring. Okay, the Vue ecosystem. I don't know why I'm commenting about this. I just like this parallelism between the JavaScript ecosystem as a whole turning over and the Vue ecosystem itself. When they switched to Vue 3, they had a coordinated shift across the entire stack, all shifting versions all at once. And I think it's a really nicely coordinated step change because all the Vue users had a very cohesive experience when changing that around. We don't really have that for JavaScript. I think it takes someone with some ambition of covering the JavaScript ecosystem to tell you what to use next. This is an interesting one. So TypeScript 1, it's pretty much like I've been covering TypeScript for the past 6-7 years, and there's not really much debate. The compiled JS languages like Elm or even Flow or PureScript, they've kind of just stayed stable. They're very happy users of each, but by far the overwhelming default has been TypeScript. That is no longer in question. The question is what's next? Either we build TypeScript into JavaScript as comments, which is a proposal that came out this year that has been extremely popular, or we move away from TypeScript and go into JSDoc, which both Svelte and Deno have started doing. So it's interesting to look out for counter trend. Like everyone's adopting TypeScript, but wait, hang on. These people who are very familiar with TypeScript moving away from it for some of their reasons. I think it's worth checking out. I've tried it out in some of my own personal projects, and I really like that development flow. But you don't get the same level of type safety if you do the JS doc version of typing. Still, both of these are very experimental. I would say worth checking out if you want some better experience. Something else I did not anticipate in my original write-up about the third age of JavaScript is the popularity of monorepos. Vercel acquired Turbo Repo at the end of last year, and I think that it is probably the right starting point for a lot of projects, right? Like if you start a new project, you want an app, you want a design system, you want a test suite, all of these are basically going to be arranged in some kind of monorepo fashion, and your tools might as well assume for them and build quickly for them as well. So I had some masterclass with the NX team, who were the first to arrive on the scene, and then Turbo Repo as well, which, I mean, I can't really pick between those two because they know so much more than me about monorepos. I do think that this is a new trend that I think more JavaScript developers should embrace because it's just good architecture. Okay, another interesting development, Cloud IDE development. I wasn't sure about this when I first wrote about the JavaScript thesis, but now I really think so. Like now we're sort of moving everything into the cloud for various reasons. Like for StackBlitz, they developed web containers, which are really interesting to run Node.js in the browser for some reason. So, and it's just really mind blowing about how they did this and made this happen. I think as more and more frameworks like Remix or SvelteKit or Next.js start being full stack frameworks, you're going to need all these testing environments in the browser for you to quickly preview or test out all these APIs. And StackBlitz is probably the current winner on that. Gitpod, I went from skeptic to vocal user. We use it at Temporal for starting every single service, every single test that we do. And Codespaces are on the way out. They're not released yet, but obviously it's GitHub's official version with VS Code built in. Okay, that was on the fringe of the more speculative stuff. Now we're going into the sort of more adventurous things where you're going to need a lot more effort to use them by replatforming. One thesis I really liked, which I wrote about recently, was smart clients versus smart servers. In other words, how much state do you want on your client for offline first and sort of automatic syncing, and how much state do you want on the server? I think there's currently a debate between some open source companies and some open source authors on how best to author this for your applications. I don't have time to get into the details of this infrastructure, but you can check out my blog post on that for more. But I think this is a really interesting shift in the architecture, and I'm seeing with more and more streaming coming in from frameworks like React Server Components and Remix, like we're going to have a swing back in favor of smart servers, which we previously did not have. Okay, I originally called something Neo-Isomorphic Rendering, which is basically bringing back a term that we used to have on server side and client side. And I really like Lydia's talk from yesterday, spelling out all the different variations of this. What is striking to me in the evolution so far in the past 3 years is that their static site generation, like pure SSG, pure static site generators, are basically dead. No one does pure static site generators. Even 11T, which is pure SSG, started doing serverless, and Gatsby started doing serverless. There's just a huge demand for server-side rendering that we really want to see in our frameworks for that flexibility. So I really like to see that. There's also a movement towards incremental rendering. Both Vercel and Netlify have their versions of that, and I think that is a right mix of trade-offs, particularly if you want to solve for build times versus delivery. Edge routing, I think, is one of the more speculative things as well, where you can start to render on the edge. I think it was Kent. Yeah, Kent gave a really good talk about that, so I'm not going to cover this. But I think these are all like a list of trends that I'm going to start putting together in an overall model for you to start thinking about. And then finally, I want to think about like financial infrastructure as well, like the re-architecture of how we do these things. It's just very clear that these 10 years are going to be more VC funded than the last 10 years. And that's going to fundamentally shift how we monetize, how we build, what products that we talk about as well on stages like this, because they have the resources to employ people to talk about it. So that's the overall like re-platforming fields, all the options that you can cover. And then finally, we can talk about reskilling, because as much as we love JavaScript, like there's some point at which it may end. It might be heresy to say. And so we should start talking about reskilling. It's like what could be a threat to JavaScript. WebAssembly actually became, towards the end of the second age, the start of the third age of JavaScript, WebAssembly became an official language alongside HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. It's like this thing's gonna be supported forever. And it's not that old. Like, something that's interesting to me is that while we're in the third age of JavaScript, WebAssembly is kind of in its first age. They're building out and exploring what its implication could be at an official framework level, or in an official language level. There are alternative web application platforms that are all pretty interesting. I think the dark horse to me is Flutter. A lot of React Native folks who try it, particularly Jamin, I don't know if he's here or not, but Jamin has a really good article on comparing React Native versus Flutter. And the React Native people, if you're already sufficient in JavaScript and you're already sufficient in React Native, you will hate Flutter. You hate the guts out of Flutter. But ask everyone who doesn't have that baseline, and they'll tell you a very different story. They tell you they seem very energetic and inspired, and I think there may be a generational shift happening. And Flutter keeps surprising every single year that it continues to grow. All right, so we've sort of built up to this overall image of the third age of JavaScript, right? We have a rainbow of like rejoicing at trends that currently exist, replacing with incrementally adoptable tools, re-architecting something, those frameworks that require more work to sort of build up from scratch, and then maybe in the speculative future, reskilling in case JavaScript ends someday. I think this is the first time I've managed to squeeze all technologies into some kind of adoptable framework. And if you want to tweet it out, there's a nice little emoji that you can use, because I kind of call it, I like talks that have emojis. But this is my mental model that I'm presenting for the first time today, and I hope you like it. Finally, I'm going to end with opportunities, because like a lot of this is being worked on by people smarter than us, smarter than me for sure. I don't feel like there's much for me to do except just spend all my time learning new tech, which is like not the best way to spend my time. I think there are a few opportunities that I want to open your mind towards. And this is a personal recommendation. There are lots more opportunities that I can't include here. I just want to give you 3-ish, 3.5. The first is to teach. In the latest State of JavaScript survey, by far the top 3 responses to how do you learn JavaScript today is self-directed learning, online courses, and videos and screencasts, which means that the next generation of JavaScript developers all learn from you. The rest, like everyone in this audience, you have knowledge that you could share to other developers that could be really valuable to the next generation. And I would like to encourage you to do this, and not only do that for free, but also try to do it for money. There's Egghead.io, which got me started teaching JavaScript. And also, if you want to do the elite version, you can try the Josh Como version, who started doing an independent course talking about CSS and JS. Our next 2 speakers, Wes and Scott, also have independent businesses. For people just getting started who don't have an audience and want to really get started teaching and getting more beginners, I really like this new program by Ryan Schenke called Course Lift. You can check it out. Basically, it's an email marketing program that helps you build your audience while you build your course. That's the easy opportunity. What's next? I think another one that's super interesting, but it's a little bit harder, is stretching out JavaScript into more and more things that it could be doing. So provisioning infrastructure is something that I've been really deep into at Temporal as well as at Amazon. So I call this thesis the self-provisioning runtime, and something that you're going to hear about from Jeremy Daly tomorrow is serverless cloud, where just declaring little API endpoints gets you both the function and the infrastructure behind it, so you don't have to provision that separately. Basically, the thesis is, what if your JavaScript runtime could read your code and provision everything that you needed for your code? It's a mind-blowing concept once you really grasp the implications and done enough setup, which I certainly have. All right, finally, I want to bring you towards, I want to raise the level of your ambition. Right? We have a lot of things that we do today are very incremental. Like, how do we move from X to Y? How do we change the way that we do things in the small? But I want to change the macro trends that have not changed at all. So, one example is the trends of JavaScript bundle size. They've increased from 2011 from about 100K of JavaScript for the average website in 2011 to about 500K as of 2022. And this has not slowed down at all. No matter what you did for server-side rendering or static-side generation or whatever you did, that has not slowed down at all. And that probably needs to change. As of 2019, I think this is a striking result as of 2020, the increase in JavaScript bundle sizes was about 18 to 19%. And that has not really shifted at all. And why is that? Well, most of the people that write JavaScript or ship JavaScript are not here. If you're here, you're at the top of that adoption curve. You're the early adopters. You spend your free time or your work time learning about new things in JavaScript. Most people don't. So most of the internet is increasingly being consumed by WordPress. Like if you actually want to impact JavaScript as a whole, you probably want to be a WordPress developer, which is sad to say at a React conference. And if you want to impact the vast majority of JavaScript that ships across the web, go work on jQuery, 84% of the web. React is around about 8%. So that just gives you a sense of like where the bulk of the curve is and where we are in that curve, right? And if you want to have impact, like how do you shift the rest of the ecosystem along with you, right? Because you're so advanced, you're so smart, you're so intelligent, you're working on such interesting techniques, but you're not affecting the rest of the world. Finally, the open web. This is something I'm pretty passionate about, so I left it to the last. Obviously, it's no surprise that mobile web has, mobile usage has crossed desktop usage over the past 10 or so years. But the increase in mobile is actually the decline in the open web because all of the mobile apps, substantially all of the mobile apps, are taken up by native apps, right? Like by closed app ecosystems. And so how do we reverse these trends and how do we make impact to the broader user rather than in our own little filter bubble? So I think those are moonshot opportunities in the sense that I don't have a solution. If I did, I would be working on it. But I think that we should, at every possible opportunity, talk about these things that matter, talk about the long game, because I want to play long-term games for long-term people. So thank you very much. This is the 30 Days of JavaScript, and I love your comments and questions. Thank you.